Welcome to part 2 of 3 of the video series to model the counter-bearing bracket. There's a bunch of ways to approach this. The way I'm going to approach it is it's going to be in 2 stages. And then once we finish that, we will put the 19 millimeter through bolt holes in. We're going to make sure that we have this midpoint snap point on with our object snaps. Now we're going to go and we're going to make a line from the midpoint of the edge I have highlighted. And that'll go to the, we actually want to go past the center. And for due diligence, we should have ortho on to make sure it's 90 degrees. So go ahead and do a line that goes to origin. Alright, so now we will take that line we just created and we're going to offset it by the thickness of the web, which is 19 millimeters, so half of that is 9.5. And we're going to offset to either side of the line. We're going to draw another line that goes from endpoint to endpoint to create, of the two lines we just offset, to create the bottom end of a box. Now at this point I'm going to go to wireframe because I want to see what's going on where our intersect points are. So we have our two construction lines that represent the width of the flange. Okay, so what we want to do is we want a resulting chord that goes across to meet the transition period for the web. In order to do that, we're going to create a circle, and we need to make sure our object snaps include center. Okay. And we're going to pick up on the center of our arc, and then the tangency point. It's a little hard to see, we've got a white line on top of the model, but when we go to trim this, you should be able to see it. And we're going to trim off each side of the arc and trim off our lines, and we should be able to select on the endpoints of our trimmed line. We will then make a region out of those elements. So we're going to go to draw, and we're going to create a region of the width of the web, the base of the web, and the little piece of arc we have. Leaving the line is just a construction line to be used in the future if we need it. We're going to accept those as our region, and then we're going to do an extrude. We're going to select our region. We're going to accept it by hitting enter, and set the height to the height of our boss by clicking on that line there. Okay. So if we go to shade mode and we look at the front of the part, so the back, we should have a feature that looks like this. Now we need to put the tapered face on it. And there's a couple ways to approach this. I'm going to draw it on the side of the existing model web that we've made, but there's a way to put it on with draft. There's all kinds of ways of doing this. The downside of what I'm going to do is it's going to create a little piece of material we're going to have to remove later that will fill in that chord area that I was talking about. So this little area where the straight line is going to get filled in, and we'll have to cut that material back out. But that is similar to how this process would have been manufactured. Typically this would have been a casting with fillets all around, and anything that has a square edge on the end has been machined from a larger piece. So here we go. We're going to switch our view to the right side view, and we're going to draw a line that's going to go from top to bottom on our web. Okay, that's our first line. We're going to draw a second line that's going to go from that same corner we selected, and it's going to go out past the part. So those are the two legs of our triangle we're trying to create. I'm going to go ahead and draw another line from one of the corners of the model that's just going to be used for trimming. And that we'll use that to trim this line off flush with the front of the part. So if we trim that, we now have the leg of our triangle contacting with the edge. There's a couple ways you could have done that. Alright, so now that we've done that, we don't need this line sticking out here. Now let's connect our two legs of our triangle and their hypotenuse to make a hypotenuse. Ortho will give you a little fit there when you're trying that, but it'll still let you do that. So this is a triangular region that'll be used for another extrusion. Might help to look at it straight on. Alright, we're going to go to wireframe. Okay, we're going to go to wireframe. We're going to select our region. Make sure it's just highlighting the lines you want, not the entire model. Accept our region. And now we're going to extrude that region. And we're going to go a distance, which is the width of our web. There we go. So if we go back to shaded view, you can see what we've done. Now right now I have three solid bodies. We have the web, we have our little wedge we've made, and then we got the main body. At this point we want to make sure we bring all these pieces together. So we're going to go to the solid union command, and we're going to select our three entities to make them one. There we go. Now to take care of this little issue we created for ourselves here. So this would have been an oversized casting. This face was machined down. So there should be a square edge here where the end mill cut the face of the bearing surface. There are several ways to approach this. The way I'm going to approach it is to create a cutting body to cut this. So first we're going to switch back to our front view so that we're operating in the correct plane. We're going to go to circle. We're going to select the center of our boss, and then we're going to make it the same diameter as the boss. So let's pick the intersection there, which makes that circle we just created the right size. Now I'm going to switch back to wireframe. It's a little easier to select these things. Again, we don't have to create a region off the circle we just generated. We're going to do an extrude, and we're going to create a cylindrical body, and then we'll use that to remove this little piece of material here. I guess you could make just a little wedge shape and just cut that one little region, make it its own region, but I feel it's easier to do it this way. And you get the diameter where it should be. So we're going to extrude, and it just has to be long enough to cut off that little piece. So let's just call it 3 millimeters. That's fine. And now we have a separate body there on top of there. And we'll go back to shaded view so you can see what's going on there. Okay. So that volume represents what we're going to cut away. So we're going to go to our solid subtract. We're going to select what we want to keep, which is the main model, and then hit enter. And then we're going to select our cutting body, which is the disc. And voila, we've got a little tiny lip here, and it's machined down. Now your transition may not be identical to that. The drawing is ambiguous, so it could be recessed with a partial fillet there. That would be one way to interpret, but without them giving us a dimension for an angle on this drawing, that little transition's up to interpretation. Okay, so let's put in the bolt clearance holes. We now have all the additive work done. We're just going to finish off putting the hole features in. Okay, so to do that, we are going to switch to the bottom plane. The reason I want to do that is just a little less busy, and we can create the feature here on the bottom. Okay, let's go to our object snaps, and let's turn on midpoint, and make sure object snaps are on. And we're going to create some construction geometry so that we can find where these holes are located. So if we're referencing the what would be the back, this side, the hole pattern is centered on the base flange, and the hole pattern is 82 millimeters apart. And then it's 45 millimeters from the back. So the first thing I would like to do is create a line that will give us center. And we should be able to pick on, with the object snaps, the midpoint of both ends of the keyway boss that we have there. And now we can go to the offset command, and we can set that at half of the spacing of the bolts, which is 41 millimeters, bolt holes, and offset that line to either side. So we now have our hole centers defined in one of the two axes. Now we need to define the distance in the other axis. So to do that, I'm going to draw a line from one of the corners, and then we're going to offset that line by the distance from the back, which is 45 millimeters. Okay. Oop. Okay, so where those two lines intersect is where the first hole occurs. And if we are to extend that line that we just offset, we will then have the intersection of where the second hole goes. Now we're going to go to circle, and we're going to select the endpoint there, and we're going to switch to diameters because that's the drawing calls it as, and it's a 19 millimeter diameter hole. We can hit enter and enter again to repeat that procedure. Oops. Maybe not. We're going to make another circle, and it's going to be at the intersection of the other two lines. And we're going to go to diameter, and we're going to make that 19 millimeters. All right, so we have our two holes identified. I'm going to go back now, and we're going to delete some of this construction geometry. Okay, so then we're going to make these two extruded cylinders that will cut through the other body. We're going to use the extrude command, and we can include them both. Extrude command. I would go back to the wireframe mode so that we're more intentional on what we're selecting. And then the distance we extrude is somewhat arbitrary as long as we don't go too far and cut into our boss. So I'm just going to click, and we now have, if we go back to shaded mode, we now have these two pin looking things that we're going to use to subtract the area where the holes are. So we go to the solid subtract. We want to keep the main body of the model, and we want to subtract the two cylinders, leaving the holes where they should be placed. Okay, this completes all the steps for the additive processes, and I suggest you get to this stage before you attempt filleting. Once your fillets are going in, it's hard to come back and change your main features. So at this point, you might want to check your work, make sure everything's dimensionally correct, and then move on with fillets. This is the end of this second video in the three-part series on how to model the counter bearing bracket. Please continue in video number 3.